Good evening, boys and ghouls. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Edgar, and you're watching Historical Conspiracies. Tonight we're going to be going over a list for you guys, and this is one I've been looking forward to because it involves a lot of shows that I drew on for inspiration when I was first asked to work with Historical Conspiracies. So let's not waste time and get right into this list. Today we'll be going over a list of spooky campfire story shows. These will be TV shows that were compilation of standalone stories, where each episode would basically be one story. We will also be including down below a link where you guys can go and vote for your favorite one that's on this list. So I hope you'll take a minute to go do that, and maybe we will do top 10 episodes of the winner. Number 1, Tales from the Dark Side, 1983. This show is amazing. The Tales from the Dark Side was one of those shows that had all kinds of actors and actresses who many of us would recognize later. I remember Christian Slater was in one of them as and you see him as a little kid, and there's a lot of appearances. For those of you who are super horror movie nerds, Tom Savini actually did a lot of the effects, and I believe he even wrote one of the episodes. And Tales from the Dark Side, I believe, ran for 4 seasons, possibly 3. Definitely worth checking out. Number 2, Are You Afraid of the Dark? This was first aired in 1990, and this television show was actually on Nickelodeon, so you would assume it was geared for kids, but I gotta tell you, creative, psychological horror and spooky campfire stories don't have to contain adult content in order to really reach into your brain and creep you out. So the framing device used for each of the stories, the hosts, are a group of kids called the Midnight Society. They have different personalities, and they gather in the woods at night to tell campfire stories. We find a lot of people in these episodes as well who you will recognize from other movies and shows when they eventually grew up, so that's always fun. But just because it was made for kids, I really wouldn't, I wouldn't cross it off your list of shows to see. They had about 4 seasons, and then there was a reboot of it a couple years later. That did not last long. I think they did 1 season of that. But the content was really great, so I would recommend you check that out. Once again, that's Are You Afraid of the Dark? Number 3, The Twilight Zone. That's from 1959 is when that first aired. I can't imagine that there's any of you who haven't heard of The Twilight Zone. However, it is a very creepy, spooky horror story kind of show. Obviously 1959, it was black and white. They did do a reboot some years later, where I think they retold some of the same stories, and there was also a movie. So plenty of Twilight Zone content to check out. I recall every year, back in the old days when cable TV was a thing. Every year we would get together, and on New Year's Eve, there was a channel that would air every single Twilight Zone episode. It took like 3 days or something, and we would watch those. It became a tradition. Number 4, Amazing Stories. This first aired in 1985. I know what you're thinking. The show, if you've seen the show anyway, it's not very creepy or spooky necessarily. but it definitely gets a place in our list. There's a lot of fantastic stories and very creative storytelling, but it was geared towards kind of a softer audience, so the stories usually had somewhat of a happy ending. So I would definitely recommend watch these if you get the chance. I believe there was 2 seasons of this show. Number 5. Tales from the Crypt, 1989. All hail the Crypt Keeper! Who could forget the comedic Crypt Keeper, our host in the HBO series Tales from the Crypt? These stories are definitely not for the meek. You wouldn't find this on Nickelodeon. So I suggest, as I often do, that you go ahead and be sure to have someone to cuddle up with while watching these ones. When I was young, the show was a valuable and rare experience because it was only available on a paid channel, so I could only see it when I was over friends' houses. Number 6. One of my favorites, Monsters. First airing in 1988. It is a wacky show, and like all the other shows on our list, every episode was a different story. But Monsters has been overlooked by society. This is a gem of a show, and I think you'll be hooked even right at the intro. This is a dark and sometimes comedic series with a few seasons, so you've got plenty to watch if you haven't seen this before. I was surfing the channels with my dad one night, and we came upon the intro, and I remember him looking at me and saying, like, what the heck is this? And I had no idea, and if you, we'll leave a link below, you could go and watch the intro, but it was pretty bizarre, and I knew right away that I was going to love the show. Eventually I had a chance to see them all, and I suggest you do the same if this is your type of entertainment. When I was working on this list, I did a search on IMDb for Monsters, and I was very unhappy to find that it didn't show up. I mean, it's an exact match for the name of the show. I think this is a travesty. I think you guys should comment below if you think we should petition IMDb to make sure that this jewel of the 80s shows up in its rightful place at the top of the search list when you type in the word Monsters. Number 7. Freddy's Nightmares, 1988. A spin-off of the Nightmare on Elm Street movie franchise, this series is a 40-minute, or, with commercials it was an hour, 2 stories per episode kind of show. Sometimes the 2 stories were connected, sometimes they weren't. But the unique brand of Freddy Krueger as a host and the chilling vibe the stories give you make this show worth seeing. But beware, there may be a bit of corniness going on, because as you guys know, Freddy Krueger loves his terrible puns. I watched this show on TV when I was young, and I remember it being hard to find copies later on. If you can get your hands on these, definitely check them out. It's worth adding to your mental library. Number 8. Alfred Hitchcock Presents. First aired in 1955. This is one of the ancient kind of spooky story TV shows. It was well known and enjoyed by many who were into the genre at the time. So people who liked watching The Twilight Zone or The Outer Limits. So there was a reboot years later, which I think also was on a pay channel. But I haven't seen many of these at all, maybe 1 or 2, and so I don't have much of a personal comment on them. The 1 or 2 that I saw were good stories, and but let me know if you guys have seen this. Let me know if you think it's worth me going and checking them all out. Number 9. The Outer Limits, 1963. Just the thought of the intro to this show genuinely gets me all happy and nostalgic. The Outer Limits was a mind-twisting series with many unique stories. It is hard to say if this should be considered sci-fi, but a lot of creative storytelling fits into multiple categories. so I'm going to include it on our creepy campfire story list. There was a reboot of a colorized version, which I recall was also very good. So if this is a show you haven't heard of, you should go find it. It'll get you thinking, and it will keep you entertained. Alright, that's the end of our list for this week. Hopefully you guys will have heard something that gives you something awesome to go and watch. And when you get a moment, definitely check out the link below so you can vote on your favorite show if you have one. And on that note, I'll see you next time. Once again, my name is Edgar, and this is Historical Conspiracies. Have a creepy day.